Hello and welcome to another episode of Last Week in Localization, the show where we talk about the latest from the world of localization in terms of events, research, and news and whatever else we find relevant, really. Today here with me, I have my wonderful colleague, Rucha. Rucha, thank you so much for joining me here today. This is actually the first time that I'm going live by myself, so I really hope that everything goes well. So far, I always had Tucker working his magic in the background, so thanks for that, Tucker. Thanks for taking the risk with me, and to any listeners and viewers, bear with us. I hope things go well, and if not, let us know. Rucha, tell us about yourself a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And first of all, thank you for having me here. It's my first time as well on a live stream. So little bit about myself. So I'm Rucha. I am Customer Success Manager with Nimdzi. And I've been into localization for 13 or 14 years now in different roles, from a language team lead to project manager to business implementation manager. And now I'm Customer Success Manager with Nimdzi and the amazing team there. So yeah, that's all about me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And the reason we have you here today is you recently published a wonderful, I wanted to say article, but it's really a large report for Nimdzi about translation memory management best practices. So before we dive into that topic, I know pretty much nothing about this topic. It's not my area of expertise, which is why we have people like you and others on the team who are experts in this area. So maybe before we get into this, can you tell me and all the listeners as well what exactly we're talking about? And maybe before we even do that, can you explain what exactly a translation memory is? Because I feel like maybe not everyone that's listening is as versed in localization in this whole universe as we are or you are. So tell us a little bit.
Sure. Translation memory is basically what, it's like a repository of all the translations that we do, which includes two languages, the source and the target language. So think of it like a dictionary, but only that it is for strings or phrases and sentences and not just words. So this particular repository stores a particular string or sentence in the source language and aligns it with the translation of that sentence into its target language. And so all these sentences are actually one after the other stored in a particular place, in this particular tool. And what it does is it helps our linguists and all of us in the translation and localization to not redo something that's already done. So if a particular sentence is translated already, what we can do by use of translation memory is recall that. So it helps us, first of all, speed up the translations, maintain consistency so that, a sentence once translated does not get translated in another way. So it helps us maintain consistency. And of course, there are cost savings because we don't have to pay for something that's already translated once. So that's what basically, in a nutshell, translation memory is. And today we are going to talk a little bit more about how to maintain this, how to manage this, because I wouldn't say it's a complex tool or something, but I guess a tool is as good as its management. So what are the best ways to look after it, how to create it, how to structure it, maintain it, and basically, the best practices around it. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, because as you said before as well, I actually really like what you just said as well, that a tool is only as good as you manage it, right? So you have to know how to use it, otherwise it makes no sense. And sometimes even with the simpler tools, it can be difficult, or maybe sometimes because they are simple, you don't consider that there might be more to it, right? So
right.
maybe so in this article or in this report you're writing about the best practices for translation memories. Tell us a little bit why that is important, or what was the reason for the report? Why did you feel like you needed to write about this?
Thank you for asking that, Vic. So over the years, when I worked, in localization, it's like, every organization has a different way of managing. And that's not just because it's a thing about, the localization service provider and how they want to manage, but there are various, considerations in how a translation memory is set up or managed, depending on the content type, the client's preferences, of course, the target and target locale, language pair, etc. I had the opportunity to learn the right way about it right from the beginning. But, I started working with Nimdzi, and I realized that maybe that's not what everyone is following. We come across, so many questions all the time that what is the right way? How can we do this? What are the features? What are the functionalities to use in such and such case, etc.? And I realized that, there is just so much out there that needs to be, let's say, put in a streamlined manner and shared, so that everybody can follow the best practices. And honestly, translation memory is all about doing it right the first time. The moment we miss that concept and we work on it in a hurry, in a hasty manner, we only realize that later on cleaning up the chaos that was built is going to be so much more difficult. So you do it right the first time, reduce the noise, and that's it. And because we were getting so many queries about it, I thought it's really good to put something down that's short, simple, straightforward, and hopefully everybody will find it helpful.
Perfect. Just the way we like it at Nimdzi, nice and practical. And yeah. So with that lovely intro, and by the way, I completely agree with you. It's better to do it right from the beginning than cleaning up the mess after, because ultimately you will create a mess. So it's better to put in the work right from the start and get some help and some insights. So so this report actually that you wrote, it's exclusive for Nimdzi partners. But I guess we're getting a small preview here today of some of the stuff you wrote about. So obviously we're not going to go into all of the detail, but it's a pretty extensive report, as you can see here. So maybe just tell us what are the most important things that someone needs to look out for or what are the best practices? Maybe the top two for now.
Well, that makes it so much more difficult for me.
Sorry. Well, whatever is easier for you. Whatever is easier. I'm not the expert.
I'm just kidding.
You are.
Best practices are generally so many because, as I mentioned, it's more about the content type, the industry, and even the content platform where it's going to be used, the target audience, the language, target language, etc. So based on all these, and of course, the end customer or your customer's, let's say, branding guidelines. Based on all this, the translation memory use and management will actually vary vastly. But some of the things, of course, are very, let's say, common, or they are ground rules. And I would say, and it's in the report, but I would just like to, put it in a nutshell that it's basically the 4 pillars, of translation memory management. So you said it right. You structure it well as per the various variables, as I mentioned. You maintain it, you keep updating it, and you back it up regularly. And that's really all that needs to be done. It sounds simple, but when followed correctly, it's enough. So when it comes to settings and structure, it's about, how do you structure it? I mean, do you go for, let's say, a version that is working version wherein you save everything that's still not approved or reviewed. Whether you create a master TM separately where you only upload or only save what is approved and reviewed by the client. What is the structure you give? Do you create a translation memories per language subject line, per let's say per reviewer, even because sometimes the customers have different reviewers for different markets, or even for the same market. So do you create it per reviewer, and how do you basically set and structure it is super important. This needs to be thought right from the beginning. And for all of this, the basic setting and basic structuring of a translation memory, it is super important to involve the customer, your client, and understand what are their requirements with regards to quality. Do they prefer accuracy over relevance, or the other way around? And this helps you really find out what would be the best structure for a particular translation memory for a particular language pair. So it's basically the first pillar of good translation memory management. The next is, of course, maintaining. Maintenance basically is about putting the right functionalities or features, selecting the right features. So just to get a little deeper into what is the concept behind translation memory is, you put premium or penalty settings. So wherein any particular string that is translated and saved in a translation memory is in a chronology of, so its previous string and its the string following string are also saved. And this helps us create a context to every sentence that is translated. So to a translation that is also in context correct and can be recalled, what are the premium settings that we need to put? What are the penalty settings to be afforded or set for a translation memory that is, let's say, not final, not reviewed by the client, etc. So what are these features or settings to put comes under your maintenance of the translation memory, because every time you upload a file into it, it's going to pick up those settings. Or if the settings of the files are different, then it's going to, you're going to need to finalize which setting is final when you put a file into a translation memory, when you save it in there. So these are your, let's say, maintenance features or functionalities. The next is, of course, the backup. It is often not, let's say, considered important, but I can't stress enough how important this step is, because backing up is what helps you save what was already there in case the server crashes or something happens. And while saving a file into the translation memory, you lose the entire memory. So backing it up every time before updating is super duper important.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that backing up your files is super important anyway. I mean, I think probably anyone can. No, not to contradict this at all, and I agree. It's always a good reminder, because even whenever you're writing anything, whenever you're doing anything, like, it's good to have backup copies just in case something happens, because otherwise you will be very sorry for all the work you put in. You can avoid disaster that way. So actually, this brings me to a question I've been meaning to ask you as well. So since we're talking about best practices, let's maybe quickly consider the flip side. The reason why we need to have best practices as well is, like, what are some of the pitfalls? Are there some you can highlight, like some typical errors that people make? Is that just the opposite of the best practices, or are there some examples or stories that you can share maybe?
Good question. There are many pitfalls, of course. I think the biggest pitfall is to think that translation memory is just a place to save and upload every translated file to, not knowing what its real use is and how it's going to help you in subsequent projects or translations. And it may sound like I'm coming back to the same point about what is the best management practices, but it's a pitfall because often and I have seen this happen, often it has been used as just a repository of translations where everything translated and paid for has to be uploaded and saved. And probably in the next project, we recall that to see what is the new words or the new sentences that need to be translated. So there is cost savings. The pitfall here is that we do not realize that translation memory management actually requires a certain level of training and understanding of the concept and the very use of the tool. That's the biggest pitfall I've seen. And, from that comes everything else. So what if we are not following the best practices? What could possibly go wrong? Apart from mistranslations, poor alignment of source segment and target segment, massive rework that will, most probably fall upon the editor of your job, or poor reviews from the client reviewers, in-country reviewers. It could also hamper your, project delivery because, of course, that adds to the timeline, that adds to the cost because you're probably redoing what you intended not to redo by use of translation memory. So the pitfalls are many, but to be specific about a particular case is, I would say, not putting the right metadata. So metadata is basically the data behind the data. So any, let's say, bilingual glossary or terminology management, pretty much translation memory also needs metadata. Yeah. So that could be, literally your attributes. That's the, technical term. So the attributes that we add, it could be name of the reviewer who is signing off the translation, who will again sign it off in future. So you need to be consistent with their requirements and their style and quality expectations. It could also be, poor penalty settings or misthought penalty settings where we just say, let's assign a 5% penalty so that anything that matches it does not match or rather meets the criteria gets discounted by 5 to 10% so that it falls under, let's say, fuzzy match or new sentence or new words which need to be translated again. Sometimes those settings can also be huge pitfall because either you're not drawing the right leverage from your translation memory and hence you are adding to your cost, or sometimes you are drawing more leverage than needed and hence that's resulting in poor quality of translation. So pitfalls are many, and as I mentioned, there's a pitfall at every stage which you do not follow correctly. So it's really about setting it right from the beginning, and I think it is it's something that we emphasize a lot, but still needs to be emphasized more, is that training your team in translation memory management is really important because there are so many things that when we use on a daily basis, we kind of assume that it is known or understood, but it is not,
That's a very good point.
I mean, it's about really breaking the assumption and saying, okay, you don't know anything about this, so let's start from the beginning. And that's when you have questions that are relevant. That's when you will rethink. And I think that also gives us a chance to improve the tool itself, I guess.
Yeah, and actually, all of the typical pitfalls that you mentioned as well, to me, it sounds like they all have a high cost factor attached to them at the end, right? You were saying there can be mistranslations and things need to be redone again, and potentially, you have an unhappy client, you might lose the client, you might, ruin your reputation, all of these things. And which, is horrible, of course. They say it takes, I don't know how many years to build your reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. I mean, sometimes people are more forgiving, but still, this is not good. And especially if it can be avoided with just knowing how to do it right, if it can be done easy enough. And again, when it comes to cost savings, you were saying that translation memory is largely also there to save costs, to be quicker, to ensure quality. And if you don't do it right, then you have the opposite of that, from what I'm hearing. So that's not good. And then, so who would typically provide this kind of training then that you were saying is so vital for teams?
Well, talk to Nimdzi. Of course, we will. We would, of course. But if you're talking about a typical, let's say, language service provider organization, then I think this falls upon maybe the localization engineer who knows the tool best. But another pitfall there would be to leave that job to just the localization engineer, because they know the engineering side of it, the file engineering side of it, the technical, the technology side of it.
Yeah.
But there is so much in translation memory. It's ultimately about languages. So I guess involving a linguist or a project manager who has, or anybody who has the overall view of the whole localization process, the workflow, would be super important to add, their training and their knowledge here. So definitely, every organization would probably have, but and as I said, after I joined Nimdzi, I realized that probably not. What I was assuming is general practice throughout the industry is not really that. And sorry to say that again, but that's where Nimdzi comes in.
A little bit of shameless self-promotion, but what's right is right. So if it's true, no, but it's so true though what you're saying as well. And I mean, like I said before, and it's probably apparent from this conversation as well, I know very little about translation memory and this side of the industry. But when I, for example, talk about interpreting, it happens to me all the time that I think, oh, well, everyone must know this because I know this very well. But then sometimes you're surprised that people don't know certain things. And, that's also nothing to be ashamed of. It's just something, it's good to address it. And then, it's something to be solved as well. And like you're saying, we often have these assumptions like, oh, everyone knows this, everyone knows that. And that is also then again exactly where more errors happen, because if you don't even consider that people don't know this, like, for example, like I'm just talking like within your team, for example, now, you just assume, oh yeah, someone's working in this industry, in this job, they must have this kind of knowledge, and maybe people are too shy to say, or I don't know, not everyone's very outspoken, then you run exactly into these pitfalls that you mentioned, right? Then and then you have a problem. So.
Yeah, and also I feel that sometimes, and maybe more often than not, people don't know what they don't know.
Exactly.
So what they learn is what they implement, but they don't know what's outside of that knowledge, and there probably is a world out there. So that's where, you need an expert coming in to tell you that, okay, what you're doing is right, but there's so much more that can be done with it. It's an amazing technology, I would say. And that forms the basis of, everything that we have today, machine translation and all of that. So using it right is so important, and there is so much to learn about it. I would say that even today, I get to learn so much from my colleagues Yulia and Roman and everybody about the best practices, even today. So because we don't know what we have not used or what we have not learned, and that's why there has to be something that you can fall back on to look at whether you are doing right thing. There's more that you could do, and also validate your knowledge, basically. So
definitely,
yeah.
And this is another excellent point. You don't know what you don't know, and it's often that only once you go a little bit higher, you realize that there is more to know that you don't know yet, and then it continues like that. And of course, you want to get the most out of the tools that you're using. It's usually, if you implement any sort of technology, it's first of all, it's a money investment, right? And it's usually there also to save costs, like we said. So you want to make sure you get the most out of it, right? So this is then where those best practices come in, and to make sure your team is trained.
Yeah. And one thing I would like to add is, of course, saving cost is a massive, takeaway from using the translation memory, right? But let's not stop there. And often we see that a lot of clients who do not know what and I'm talking about end clients who do not know what a translation memory is, but they've heard about it and they know, okay, there are cost savings attached to it. So let's use it. It falls upon, let's say, us as users and experts, expert user of this technology to, add that it's not just about cost savings. It's about, faster time to market. It's about quality. And I feel these are the three main objectives of a translation memory. So let's not go so much after cost that we forget the other two, which are actually complementing the cost savings. So I feel that as users, we also have to inform somewhere that cost is not the sole objective of using well a translation memory tool, basically.
Yeah. And this is exactly where it comes back around to knowing more about what this is good for, what you, inform people about maybe what they don't know yet and how to best use this tool. So is there any best practice that we haven't mentioned yet that we should mention, or did we already talk about that? I don't know if I interrupted you a little bit earlier. I think I did.
No, I think we covered that, but maybe just something about, treating translation memory more like, not treating it more like, but it is actually an asset. It's a language asset. Your entire language asset stack, which includes a translation memory, a terminology database, your style guide. So we just need to make sure that it is complementing the other assets and in sync with all of that. But that's again about another best practice. And of course, as I mentioned, there are pitfalls of not using it. But I think that's where, a thorough training comes into picture.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that there's often when you start introducing a team to translation memory and you start training them, that there are certain there's always questions that come up. Are there any specific questions that you hear over and over again that clients talk about, or like in a team that come up, typical ones for newbies to translation memory?
Well, I think the most common questions are about the terminology or the jargon that is about translation memory. So what are penalty settings, and what's a premium, and what's a content match? And it's more around that. But honestly, I feel that to anybody who speaks more than one language, or who knows what it takes to put any content or product from one culture or one language to another, would probably get hang of what this does pretty soon, because we know, right? I mean, and for someone like me who comes from a country where not all the languages have both the genders, I know what it takes to put things from one language into another. And if you have that basic insight, I guess it's pretty clear. And then it's all about just knowing the functionality of the tool, the technology behind it, etc. But I would say one of the questions is, why can't we work on hard copies if we want to use translation memory? And and that's a newbie, yes, but it always amuses me how we are still looked at as an industry who could be working from hard copies. And I no offense, we do have that too, but that's the level of, I would say, technological advancement that we have actually reached so far, but we lack some visibility there, and that's why these questions come up. But that's one of the questions that I get.
Yeah, actually, this reminds me when I did my translation certification a few years ago in Germany. It had to all be handwritten as well, and I thought, this is not the reality of the market. Okay, fair enough, doing it now for the exam and all that, but it would be nice to introduce some more modern technology and a little bit more reality into the courses as well, because like you said as well, then otherwise afterwards the translators go, and they have to be retrained on the translation memory in-house, which, fair enough. But I'd say I would assume that maybe at the universities, it's already something that people use. And I did a little bit of that in university later for a different course. But that was funny to me. It's not long ago. So.
I know what you mean. Even now, I have so many people who ask me, so I speak two languages. Can I translate? It's just about, you can give me, your document printout, and I could probably translate that. And I don't want to be arrogant about what our industry is, but and I love what we have from the book from Renato and Tucker. Just because you have 10 fingers doesn't mean you can play a piano, right? It's pretty much like that.
And just to highlight it here as well, that is the general theory of the translation company, I think. Damn, I hope I didn't mess up the title now. Exactly. There's a really good point, and this is something also when you talk to people who aren't part of the industry, that comes up all the time. If you say you're a translator or you're an interpreter, and people like, it can just be anyone who's bilingual, and basically, like, what's the big deal? Why is it so difficult? If you speak two languages, then it shouldn't be difficult. But there's obviously a whole lot more to it, as we all know. Than just being bilingual. That's basically just the starting point, the prerequisite, and then everything else follows after.
Absolutely. It's the best part is it's about languages and technology both. And, that's the assumption I was, referring to. Often we feel that, okay, we know language and that should be good enough, but there's so much technology that we are using behind it that, of course, knowing that also is super important.
And I mean, we often take the view, of course, from the company perspective, the business perspective, the LSP, or also we mentioned the language service buyer. But looking at the linguists now, in this case, the translators, what are the benefits for them using a translation memory?
Well, often it seems that they don't have benefits, and that's a myth, because it comes across as they don't get paid for something that's already translated once. But I've had this question from a lot of linguists who were not, let's say, migrated to my translation memory use, etc., CAT tools, etc. Well, the basic thing is, it's not about not getting paid for something that's translated. It's about doing more work in the same time, because something that's already done is, getting recalled by this tool. All you need to do as a linguist is recheck and make sure that it's matching with the context and the, let's say, client requirements and expectations, and move on to the next section, move on to the next project. And I think what they gain a lot from here is being able to deliver projects that are thorough, consistent, and good quality. Being able to deliver faster so that they can move on to something new and take on more work. And I think that also brings about a kind of, professional growth, where they can actually specialize in a content or a subject field. Because if you're delivering projects faster, you are also able to, find time for yourself to learn more, to specialize in a particular subject line, and do more, because that's also natural progression for them professionally, right? So I start translating, and then I get into, editing position as a lead reviewer or a language lead. And then I get into client interaction with helping set up the quality parameters or the language asset. And then moving on to the quality management part. So that's also natural progression, I feel. So there's a lot. It's not just about the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say also, first of all, what you pointed out, a lot of from what I can tell anyway, the translation technology is about handling volumes, right? So it's not that you don't get paid the same, it's just you're doing more in the same time, basically, with the use of technology in that sense, not by actually doing more in, that sounded like stress there, but that's not what I meant. And when I actually, for the few times that I tried it as well, I love the consistency part as a linguist, because often enough you're like, I don't know if you're mulling over a certain part and you're like, what do I use here? And then later on you maybe come back to it and you're like, what did I use there again? And you have to research it again. And, I know it's just a few steps, but it's nice if you don't have to do that and that you're just reminded of what you used and you go like, yep, that's it. Good.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah. I mean, I have not worked as a translator for too long, maybe just a year, but that was without translation memory or a CAT tool. So even if it's about money, I would rather work with a CAT tool and a translation memory than not. As you said, going through hundreds of pages of translation and having to refer back to what you translated something as, and the glossary, the terminology, etc. I think I would rather have the technology help me deliver faster and a better job than actually just think about per word rate for myself.
Exactly. Okay, so I think we rounded off the topic quite nicely. We came full circle talking about all the different sides, I think. Is there anything we've missed that we haven't talked about yet that you feel like is still relevant before we call it a day?
There's so much more that is relevant and we cannot probably cover that. But I would say, let's not look at translation memory in isolation. As I mentioned, it's a part of, let's say, a bouquet that languages set. So you have terminology management, you have style guides creation and updates, etc. So don't look at translation memory management or training or learning about that in isolation. That needs to complement your other assets, your other technology, all of that together. So look at the whole picture, but let's say complete one thing at a time thoroughly, so that you make the best use of all of it.
Perfect. That's a wrap, I'd say. And like you said, there's so much more to discuss. So if anyone watching wants to find out more, you can always reach out to us on any of the social media channels or by email. Mine is sarah@nimdzi.com, or there's rucha@nimdzi.com. So it's very easy as well. Reach out to us anytime, because you can always come and talk to Nimdzi to find out more. So thank you very much for the lovely chat, Rucha. I learned a lot today.
Thank you, Sarah.
So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Sarah. It was lovely.